Imagine this. You open a newspaper in the spring of 1911. The headline says the United States government has just won its biggest case in years. The most powerful company in America is finished. The judges in Washington have ordered it to be chopped into more than 30 separate pieces. Politicians are smiling. Cartoonists are drawing the company as a dead octopus. People are telling each other, they finally broke its grip. Now fast forward just 5 years. It is 1916. The same country that celebrated that breakup is still burning oil from those broken pieces. And the quiet man at the center of it all has just crossed a number no human being has ever reached before. $1 billion. The government shattered his empire in 1911, yet by 1916, he is richer than ever, and his money is reaching deeper into the way America eats, moves, learns, and stays alive. Nobody ever explains to you how that happened. That is the gap this story will close. So here is what you are really about to hear. Not a list of facts about the first billionaire. You are going to watch how one man quietly turned a chaotic young America into a system he could run from the background. First, he wrapped himself around the country's energy. Then the government tried to cut him out. And in the end, the system he built outlived the fight, and America kept living inside it. His name can wait. To feel what he did, you and I have to start before anyone knew who he was. We start in the dark. Look at the United States in the 1850s. No highways, no neon signs, no city sky glowing at midnight. If you were a normal family, you went to bed when the sun went down, because keeping a single room lit through the night was a luxury. Whale oil was pricey. Candles burned down fast. A few extra hours of light could cost you most of a day's pay. Then, in 1859, near a little place called Titusville in Pennsylvania, drillers strike oil. For the first time, people realize this thick black liquid in the ground can be turned into kerosene, a lamp fuel that is cleaner and cheaper than what they have been burning. Very quickly, oil towns explode, wells shoot crude into the air, wooden derricks crowd the hills, small refiners appear on every side street. The price of a barrel is $10 one month and 10 cents the next. If you lived through this, it would not feel like a smooth boom. It would feel like whiplash. One year, you can afford to light your house. The next year, you cannot. One town gets rich overnight. The next town dries up and dies. Nobody is really in charge. Nobody is thinking long-term. And somewhere in this chaos, a young bookkeeper in Cleveland is quietly staring at the numbers and seeing something almost no one else sees. He is not a wild driller. He is not a charming salesman. He is the man adding up columns in a ledger. But that is exactly why he sees the opening. He notices that every barrel of oil has a story long before it reaches a lamp in someone's kitchen. You have to move it, store it, refine it, move it again, and then put it in a place where an ordinary person can actually buy it. Every step costs money. Most people around him ignore the tiny costs, a few cents on a barrel, a small saving on a shipment. They shrug and say, "It is not worth the trouble." He does not shrug. He writes it down. He asks, "If we save this on every barrel, what does it look like in 10 years?" In 1870, he and a few partners open a refinery in Cleveland. At first, it is just one more name in a crowded field. But inside those walls, he pushes his workers to use every part of the crude they can. The waste that other refiners pour into the river, he turns into products he can sell. He negotiates for better barrels, better pumps, tighter seals on the tanks so nothing leaks. The numbers begin to shift. His kerosene can hit the market cheaper, not because he is generous, but because his costs are lower. By the early 1870s, his refinery is the largest in the city. By the late 1870s, the company that grew out of it is refining the vast majority of the oil in the United States. To outsiders, it looks like he won because he found more oil. You are going to see that the real reason is much colder and much smarter. He did not just touch the oil. He took hold of the tracks it moved on. The railroads are his next move. The The big rail lines are desperate for steady business. He offers them guaranteed volume, trainloads of oil, week after week. In return, he demands secret rebates, quiet discounts on shipping that his rivals do not know even exist. So his barrels move for less. Their barrels move at full price. On the shelf, it looks simple. His lamps burn cheaper. But in the ledger, the gap is brutal. He can lower prices and still make money. His rivals lower prices and start bleeding out. He visits them with a smile and a choice. Sell and keep your name on the building, or fight and watch your numbers sink. Most choose to sell. And with every deal, every quiet signature, more of America's energy runs through his hands. Pipelines go into the ground. Storage tanks rise near the refineries. Shipping points appear in cities that have no real access to any other supplier. Without voting for it, without even thinking about it, families across the country are now lighting their homes with fuel that passed through one man's system. This is how he holds America the first time. Not with a law, not with an army, but with a network that feels too useful to question. If you are feeling, right now, that this grip was built one invisible decision at a time, you are exactly where you should be. Tell us in the comments, did you ever realize how much of this came down to rail lines and tiny cost cuts? Because the part that comes next is where the story flips. The moment when the government steps in to save the country from him and accidentally does the one thing that makes him more powerful. By the early 1900s, his company is everywhere. Journalists are calling it a trust. Cartoonists draw it as a black octopus with its tentacles wrapped around statehouses and oil wells in the Capitol dome. Reformers, preachers, small businessmen all start saying the same thing. This grip is too tight. In 1906, the United States government finally moves. It files a massive antitrust case, accusing his company of crushing competition and controlling an entire industry. The trial drags on for years. Witnesses describe the secret rebates, the price wars, the quiet buyouts. The country watches and waits. Then, in May of 1911, the Supreme Court announces its decision. The company must be broken up into more than 30 independent firms. The old structure is illegal. It is over. On paper, this is the moment everything breaks. But the part no one explains to you, the part that makes this a story and not just a court case, sits in a quieter line of print. He still owns his shares. The breakup does not strip him of ownership. It simply spreads that ownership across all the new pieces. Now think about what that means for a second. Instead of one giant company, he now owns slices of many smaller ones. Freed from the old structure, those new firms start to grow. Some specialize in different parts of the business. Some merge. Some expand overseas. Their combined value rises. And the value of his portfolio rises with them. By 1916, just 5 years after the supposed defeat, his personal fortune passes $1 billion. That is when history gives him a new label, the first billionaire. The government broke the shape of his empire. It did not break its reach. By now he is an old man, thin, stooped, famous, and hated at the same time. Preachers call him the face of greed. Protesters shout his name in the streets. For many Americans, his company is everything they do not trust about big business. He could have taken his money and disappeared into a mansion and a wall of silence. He does something stranger. He turns a huge part of that money back on the country that tried to break him. He funds a new university in Chicago and pushes it to focus on research and ideas instead of just repeating old lessons. He backs a medical institute in New York that will spend its days studying disease instead of chasing profit. He begins to quietly write checks for hospitals, labs, public health campaigns. Hookworm in the American South, yellow fever, rural schools with no books and no trained teachers. He pours money into all of them. He is not alone, of course. Other rich men of that age give, too. But he builds something new, foundations, permanent machines for giving that keep operating long after a single signature is gone. The same country that once knew him only as the man behind a ruthless oil monopoly now takes vaccines from labs he funded. Students walk through doors his money paid for. Doctors train in programs his teams designed. The grip has changed shape. It is no longer just on oil and railroads. It is on knowledge and health and opportunity. He dies in 1937 at 97 years old. Newspapers call it the end of an era. The old trust wars are long over. The world is worried about a new crisis in Europe. Most people have moved on. But the things he built have not. Those broken pieces of his old company have grown into names you still recognize. The pipelines still cross states. The refineries still glow at night. The legal tools the government sharpened on his company are now used on airlines, phone companies, and tech giants. The foundations he put in place are still signing grants, still funding medicine, still sending money into places that will never know his face. America does not wake up each morning and ask, what would that first billionaire do? But it still lives with laws that were written because of him, companies that descended from him, and institutions that would not exist without him. That is what it means to hold a country in your hands long after you are gone. The country thought it slipped out of his grip in 1911. What it actually did was accept a new kind of control. Not one giant company telling everyone what to do, but a set of systems so useful that nobody wanted to let them go. He did not hold America by shouting. He held it by being necessary. To its lamps, to its cars, to its hospitals, to its universities. That is the quiet kind of power. The kind that keeps working even when the man who built it is just a name in a history book.